Now, the president had, I think, 26 pages of State of the Nation address to give us, and he rendered it. I'd like to start by asking the MPs here. John, the Speaker had indicated that you should avoid the heckling, unnecessary noise, and I'll be frank with you that I felt so bad, terrible, watching you guys do the things you did in the House. Why? The President is reading 26 pages on his feet. If he makes a slip in pronouncing a word or something, must you hoot, must you boo the way you did?
Thank you.
When will you stop? You've been doing this for too long.
Thank you, and good morning to your viewers and listeners. Yes, it was a momentous one. Actually, the President also responded, because I've read the President's entire statement, and there were a lot of comments that he made that were not in the statement. For instance, this issue of you won with 4-5 at the Supreme Court, I won with 7-0. It's not in the speech. And when the President does that, it will then appear that he's rubbing it in. Things like, during your time, you failed to achieve that, but I have achieved this.
Yes.
When he does that...
Will you pay attention that at the time he makes those interventions, you are heckling him and making statements. Some of us are sitting back and we can hear, so he feels he needs to respond to you directly.
Yeah, but I thought that as President, he should have maintained his composure. I thought that.
But as MPs, you should be.
I'm coming there.
You should be doing what you did.
I'm coming there. So it's an issue for leadership to take up. I'm sure that when leadership insists on some of those things, I believe that we would take a cue. The other issue is that
the Speaker asked you not to, and you did. So what do you mean by when leadership?
No, I mean both sides.
You take a cue?
Normally, the job of leadership is to assist the Speaker. And so you heard the MPP side, like you rightly said, especially when the Chief Justice was introduced, they were cheering. And then our side too, there was some booing.
No, that was the second time.
Pardon?
You know the Chief Justice was introduced twice.
Yes.
The first one, our side was very quiet. And then your side is the one that booed. And then Speaker...
No, I don't remember that. Be that as it may. What Samson is saying is that can we avoid that scenario?
That's a substantive.
I think that is a substantive issue. And going forward, let's see how we can do that together. I'm happy that you've raised it. It's something that all of us...
You should watch the video back so that you don't say, going forward, I think we can, but we must.
That's
because
true.
You wouldn't like it. You wouldn't like it.
It's a two-way affair. And you see, the budget, when the majority leader was reading it, the heckling compared to it was very, very... That should tell you that some talking and some consultation is taking place.
Some people were actually surprised about that. Yes, so
clearly we'll make.
But it shows that Parliament can behave when it chooses.
Yes, but I don't know. Could you, if you have time and you want to listen to it back, watch it again?
No, it wasn't. I mean, sorry to interrupt. Yeah. It wasn't a nice spectacle, particularly to have the judiciary in the chamber being hooted at by the legislature. I think perhaps people did not recognize the symbolism of even that particular incident. When the judiciary, the Supreme Court justices were there and were being hooted at, I won't even say by just one side. I mean, even if it's one side, it's Parliament that did it. And like JJ is saying, we ought to take a deeper introspection at these matters. But yesterday, I think, was an example that Parliament can behave. And I think that we should do more of that and less of the antics that sometimes...
Maybe because you are used to booing presidents and all, you didn't feel that Chief Justice, so what, even the president.
But that's why, for example, I'm drawing attention to the symbolism. Because if people back home would disrespect MPs, would disrespect the judiciary, they take a cue from how we conduct ourselves. If we are booing the legislature and we are booing presidents and we are, literally insulting each other, calling each other names.
At times when very serious matters of the state
that is exactly how people back home will treat us. So I think it is a learning opportunity. Yesterday, like we've said, was an example of how Parliament can behave itself. And like we're suggesting, leadership has to urge colleagues to do more of that and less of the antics.
No, but just a quick one.
We can. This is the last time we are.
I agree with Kojo, but you see, the other thing too is that beyond the bowing too was the issue of Yadasi, and those. So I think that is both sides.
I agree.
Let's watch it and see how we can make progress.
Actually, there was singing. Yes, there was singing and all of that. Anyway, okay. So let's get to the substance of the President's State of the Nation. Let me start with you, JJ. Yes.
Yes, he did his constitutional job. I think Article 67 enjoins him to tell us the state of the nation. I see it in a two-way affair. The President uses the opportunity to tell us the state of the nation. I'm
sorry, let me apologize to our viewers who are joining us via YouTube. Our YouTube channel is down. We're getting a lot of feedback. We're sorry, we are getting it rectified.
So he uses it to tell us.
But if you went to My Joy Online straight, My Joy Online TV Plus, My Joy Online TV Plus on YouTube, you can also still get it. I'm sorry for that.
So the President tells us the state of the nation, and being his maiden address in his second term, I'm sure he will then take the opportunity to tell us where he wants to take the country. That is to say, a vision of what he wants the nation to achieve. Then the budget comes to actualize that with the quantitative figures. And so I think that's why the framers of the Constitution made decide that the President would always deliver the state of the nation, then the budget follows up. And some key issues came up for me. I thought that the President could have been much magnanimous. I thought that the President could have been much reconciliatory, especially having won a second term and being a President who will not be contesting again. I thought that his speech should have been much reconciliatory. That's one. Two, I also thought that he dwelt so much on 2016 or the years preceding his coming into office, because don't forget, before the dissolution of Parliament, he had the opportunity to tell us what he's done so far. Now he is handing over to himself. So I thought that he was too much heavy on that. The other thing had to do with what we might be discussing, the state of the nation itself. I recall, and I stated that in his first address, he made it clear that the key issue that he faced had to do with the economy itself. And he stated that 3 items alone accounted for 99.6% of government revenue. And he listed, I think, compensation, interest and amortization, and then statutory payments. And he gave a firm commitment that by the time he was leaving office, that would not be the situation. I think it's from 2019, before COVID. If you look at the figures, it had deteriorated. I mean, our revenues couldn't even cater for the 3 items. So clearly, that for me was a benchmark that we ought to be looking at. And for me, it is critical. Others thought that the President didn't talk about several other issues. But given the time frame, and like you said, 26 pages, I'm not sure, because one key issue that people thought you should have mentioned was at least to commiserate with the families of those who lost their lives during the elections. Don't forget that some of our supporters are very upset with us, even when it came to that issue. So I thought that as father of the nation, he had a unique opportunity, irrespective of what transpired, at least to just express some sympathies to the bereaved families and then begin the healing process. Because this election has been very rancorous, it's been very antagonistic. And so I thought that being the President, he would have at least set in motion the process for us to begin to reconcile and to forge ahead. Because whether we like it or not, we still have to work together to build this nation. These are my initial
But he stressed the fact that you needed to work together, particularly in Parliament. He repeated what he had repeated from day one, that the verdict of the people suggests that they want politicians, both opposition and the governing party, to work together. And
yes,
he was looking forward to that.
Yeah, I thought he could have done much more than just that. And that's why I gave you these specific instances. Everybody and how he assesses the president.
All right, so we'll come to the details of the statement that he gave. But could you he's talking about things that the president ought to, that he didn't. What do you say?
I mean, the state of the nation, or the message on the state of the nation, that's how the Constitution puts it, is a constitutional imperative, Article 67. President Akufo-Addo, if I counted right, gave an update on about 30 subsectors of the Ghanaian state, and where we are, as at the time he was handing over at the end of 2020, and what he seeks to achieve in these sectors broadly. This is a speech in which you will not necessarily go through all the detail, but you give the broad strokes. If you look at our constitutional history since 1993, it is always debated with contrary views. You find the opposition saying he should have spoken about this, he should have spoken about that, and you find the majority, vociferously defending that within the constraints of time, these were the things that, he could speak about. So nothing new there. The State of the Nation address.
Nothing new, but could he have missed
I'll come to those ones. I'll come to those ones.
Speaks about the debts.
I'll come to those ones. The State of the Nation address is an opportunity also for a president to participate in the shaping of the narrative about his presidency or about where the country is. And so you'll find that he will dwell a lot on the high points and acknowledge, a good number of the challenges that he has suffered during the period. Now, JJ, for example, says that he should have been more conciliatory. But if you watch the first, I think, 5 or 6 paragraphs of the speech, and you rightly mentioned it, he kept talking about working together. And that's where he paid tribute to Speaker Bagbin and his relationship with him, and the need for not just both sides of the House to work together, but the executive and the legislature to work together with the other arms of government. So in terms of being conciliatory, I think that the president hit those notes pretty well there. You are right. There was a lot of heckling. At a point, he had to say, open your eyes and see all of this in response to some of the heckles that were coming in. In 2017, you notice that he dwelt a lot on the economy and the need to turn around the Ghanaian economy because our fiscal position, our macro position, had been badly derailed. This time round, you notice that he spends a lot of time on COVID because it is the clear and present danger that we're having to deal with and navigate our way out of before he comes to the question of the economy and signals clearly the need to get on an economic recovery program. Could he have spoken about some of these other things that have been mentioned? Absolutely, he could have. And at the end of a speech like this, you'll get feedback on what else you should have included, and you build it into your future speeches. For me, I think preliminarily, it was a good day for the president to participate in the shaping of the narrative, but that is why in the essence of our democracy, we have a debate afterwards, where 275 constituencies, through their representatives, may agree on who is voicing, supporting or opposing views, and then in the end, the decision to thank the president for delivering on his constitutional mandate. The critical thing is that the blood that is required to give life to the things he was spoken about, that's the budget. And that is before us now. It gives us an opportunity to determine whether or not he really meant the things that he spoke about, or it was just, perfunctory commentary that he was preferring. And I think the budget now begins to spell out where the money is to deliver on these matters.
And there are aspects of the statement that may dovetail into the budget. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Theo Achampong, economist and political risk analyst. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning.
Great. Now, the president, in the State of the Nation, took time to take us through a reminder of what COVID-19 has done to us. I don't know what you think about the effects of the COVID-19 he spoke about, leading to revising of the growth. Among others, he drew our attention to the fact that he said that according to the COVID-19 Business Tracker Survey conducted by the Ghana Statistical Service in collaboration with the United Nations Development Program and the World Bank, the COVID-19 pandemic has led to job losses, with many Ghanaian businesses and firms being forced to cut costs by reducing staff hours, cutting wages, and in some cases laying off workers. The survey again showed that about 700 170,000 workers had their wages reduced, and about 42,000 employees were laid off during the 3-week partial lockdown imposed by himself. So he then took us to why certain things have happened to the economy and why there was a need to revise the growth rates, among others. What will be your commentary, particularly that you have a special eye for that aspect?
Good morning once again. I think we live in interesting times. COVID, like all other economies, and Ghana is no exception, has actually had a quite big impact on people, on livelihoods, and on the general well-being of the citizens at large. So I think it's in that respect that when the first partial lockdown was imposed in Ghana back in April, we did see also the government announcing a number of kind of policy packages to sustain the impact of the pandemic on citizens. Subsequently, a number of these were extended. So off the back of my mind, I do recall a waiver of taxes for health workers. I do recall, I think, water consumption being fully covered for Ghanaians from April to December. And I also do recall hot food and other related healthcare supplies like PPEs being provided to citizens. But the reality really is that we are having to work or deal with the post-COVID fallout, right? So right now, we are in a situation where revenues are down. We actually have revenues down, I think, about 12 or so % on a year-on-year basis. At the same time, we have our expenses also having gone up by a much bigger amount, and we're looking at a deficit of about 12% of GDP for 2020 alone, and potentially another 10% for 2021. And the question really is how to then sustain, right, the recovery. So if you look at the business tracker survey that you mentioned, we have seen a bit of an upturn in economic activity. The question really is the issue rather, the extent to which government uses its fiscal levers as well as the monetary levers that are available through like the Bank of Ghana to support the recovery going forward. And we can discuss some of the nitty-gritty details are associated with that. But the State of the Nation, as the President provided, for me, it was like any other State of the Nation. He did provide an update on what was happening at the sectoral level. My only little concern in there is that I think we need to sort of move the conversation beyond some of the macroeconomic indices like GDP and start, discussing more grassroots developmental progress. And also, secondly, move the conversation from we built hospitals, we built roads, to discuss output and outcomes. So how has that translated into health outcomes, education outcomes, right? Energy access, bridging the poverty indices and inequality broadly overall. Because other than that, then we're actually caught in this quagmire of just debating statistics, which actually don't really reflect at the end of the day in the well-being of the people.
But he spoke about energy access, for example. He spoke about the expansion of the national grid. He spoke about the GMPC and what it's seeking to do and the new explorations, so to speak, that it is working on. He spoke about the 1D, 1F and the projects that are on 232 projects, various stages of implementation. He spoke about 5 medium-sized agro-processing factories and 63 common user facilities which are under construction, 112, including the 5 that I have mentioned, which are operating companies as 1D, 1F. So if you say we should talk about the macro matters, these are micro matters, are they not? Grassroots, you said grassroots.
Yes, they are. My point I was making is they are all, you can actually count these, right? So in developmental talk or language, these are all inputs, right? And that's what every government would do. If you look at budgets going back to 1992, everybody does or invests in infrastructure, etc. What I'm trying to actually raise, or maybe have our minds to then for me, is how we actually connect these, right, to outcomes. So yes, we're seeing an uptick in oil, say, exploration. We're seeing investments in 1D, 1F, and the related others. But bottom line for me is, how does that then translate, for example, in the expansion of our industrial capacity? How do we measure that? What is the connection between that and the agri-sector value chain? Where for now, with let me use 1D, 1F as a very good example, where we then have to supply ancillary goods and services like the tractors or the abobo yaya that the farmers use, right? Mm-hmm. And connect that to the TVET system that we have. Those kind of big systems thinking that allows you to move the conversation beyond just providing the inputs and now tracking the output and the outcomes. I think that's where, for a country as a whole, we need to sort of gravitate a bit more towards. So my concern is not necessarily in terms of what has been provided. That's fine. I'm just adding an additional layer to it, that we need to connect these things to measuring, outcomes and closing the policy cycle a little bit.
So that, for example, maybe your final on this, so that I get my other guests to also comment on the other matters. So that, for example, under the national electrification grid, if the president announces that a total of 1,436 communities have been connected to the grid, and that there has been increased national electricity access rate to 85.17% as of October 2020, what should we do? We need him to tell us how that has been used to create industries within the rural communities, or what?
Yeah, so that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is, yes, for example, on electrification, the numbers have gone up, and that's one metric we use to access, right, electricity access or electrification more broadly. But the question really for me is, okay, so how are we then utilizing that demand to create the micro industries that are needed, for example, to add value to the agri sector or the production of, say, yams or cassava or mangoes at the grassroots level? When you begin to think that way, then it leads you to a very important point. The point here being, what is the cost of power, right? That you then provide to industry or people then use. Because John and others will tell you, we have excess power in the system. We are being faced with all these, capacity charges. Some of the contracts have even been canceled, and we've had to pay judgment debt on it, right? So expanding the power access, that is all well and good. But the systems thinking or the output or outcome level thinking then means that you have to connect these to the agri sector value chain, right? And close the policy loop. So it's not a criticism of what has been done. I am just saying that we need to move the conversation a little bit beyond just counting what has been done and, connecting these at a much kind of bigger level.
All right, thank you. And I'll return to you to ask whether you think that the president seems to suggest by the announcement that Agyapa will come back to Parliament for consideration, that he thinks that voters voted for Agyapa. We'll return to that. Now, John, yes.
I'd like to pick on from what Doc said. That is the issue of the input and the output issue, because in economic management, you are basically using some monetary and fiscal tools in order to attain whatever objective you intend to achieve. And so, like the electricity you talked about, yes, 85.1, from where? We took access rate from 54% to 83%. That is the quantum leap. And the president takes it from 83 to 85%, which means that if you just do the 4 years, he does about 0.5% per annum. And yet the president tells us that in his next 4 years, he will achieve 100%. You cannot be moving at this snail pace of 0.5% compared to your predecessor and expect to achieve universal access. So I think those are the areas we should be looking at. He talked about industry. And like he said, there's been so much talk about 1D, 1F and all that. So if you are investing in your industries, if you are investing in the manufacturing sector and putting all these figures, it must reflect in the budget. So if you take the budget statement of 2020, page 19, table 5, I think, table 5. Look at the manufacturing. In 2016, the manufacturing sector was growing at 7.9. Today, the manufacturing sector in 2019, and I tried to do 2019 before I go to 2020, so that I distinguish COVID and pre-COVID. It declined to 6.3. Despite all these so-called investments in
6.3 from what again?
From 7.9 to 6.3. A reduction in the growth rate. Then the construction sector. You got the construction sector, for me, is one of the critical areas. Because if you look at any growth model, capital formation is very important. And you must put concrete, you must construct. Construction sector in 2016, 8.4. Construction sector in 2019, negative 4.4. These are the figures. And these are figures from the budget, not from any other place. Even if you look at today, you look at our economy, and you look at the big ticket items. Between President Kufuor, President Mills, and President Mahama, we borrowed a total of $4 billion from the Eurobond. In 4 years, President Akufo-Addo is borrowing $13 billion. In 4 years. I'm saying from President Kufuor, President Mills, President Mahama, $4 billion. Akufo-Addo in 4 years, $13 billion. Look at petroleum revenues. Is that about a quadruple of what President Mahama got? Look at energy sector levies, about $12 billion. And yet, look at where we are. I was reading the budget statement, and I got worried when the minister said that we're going to lay off the how do you call it? The Nations Builders Corps, NAPCO workers.
We're going to lay them off.
I'll read that for you.
Yeah, please.
That there will be an exit plan this year.
There's no layoff.
If they are exiting the program, what is it?
But that was expected from start.
Yeah, but that is where I'm going to.
Okay.
You see, these are people who've had salaries before, they've lived. Yeah. So if you exit them...
They were never told that they will not be exited.
But
they were told from day one.
That is the issue for me as a policy maker.
I think that's the question.
Yes, like if you are exiting 90-something thousand people from the...
Where are they going?
Where are they going? What are the implications? I think it's critical that we look at that. Then the key issue for me is the big ticket economy itself. I've just looked at the 2021 budget proper. And when you look at that, our tax revenue...
Before you finish on the economy matter, the NAPCO issue is very central too, because this was a big, way to resolve part of the job issues. So you are saying that the program is poorly thought of, or what?
That is my point.
Because the program's idea is to offer these people who otherwise didn't have any jobs the opportunity to come in for a period and to gain the requisite experience so that they make it easier for them to acquire.
So let me give you an example. Some of them are involved in traffic management. That's what they are involved in. They do, I think, 4 hours a day or so, directing traffic. And at the end of the 3 years, you tell them that you've acquired a lot of experience, traffic management experience can help you acquire a job. I don't think so. Now, if you look at the budget proper, 2020...
that may not be the best example to use, right? You have them in various sectors. You have them in various sectors, yes. But you are taking one that may not give a good...
So we have to take areas that is of concern to us. Assuming the person was involved in, agriculture, that is good. But as a policy maker, I'm concerned about the extreme ends. When people, upon exiting, all of a sudden find themselves in a difficult situation, what can we do to to ameliorate that situation.
Okay.
Because in 2020,
yeah,
the budgetary provision...
What do you propose?
No, I think that just exiting them wouldn't work. And that's why Kojo says that we have to look at a plan. Have they acquired enough technical knowledge to be on their own?
In your manifesto, or after your manifesto, you had come out to say that you were going to absorb them.
Yes.
You're going to make them permanent.
Certainly.
Okay, you didn't tell us how you are going to do that within the constraints of the government sector employment.
We talked about a big push and all that, but we are not in power. The State of the Nation has been delivered, budget has been read. How can we as a nation discuss some of these issues and make some recommendations? Because from 850 million, they've reduced the budget to about 650.
For which one?
For NAPCO. So there's a 200 million gap between 2020 and 2021. That is significant.
And it has been explained that there's an exit program. Mind you, the exit program was announced right from the beginning.
No, you're not getting me.
But I'll deal with it.
I'm saying that NAPCO intends employing a similar number upon the exit. The program is not being phased out. It is the employees or the workers who would eventually exit, as you put it. Then new or fresh people will be recruited.
I'll deal with it.
Which then means that you are encountering a double expenditure. An exit program expenditure and then a recruitment expenditure. And yet you are reducing the budgetary provision from the year where you didn't have an exit and entry program from 850 to about 670, a funding gap of about 200 million cedis. That is a colossal amount that I think we should be looking at. Then the president talked about capacity charges and those things and quoted about 12 billion. I have the 2020 mid-year review statement. I pulled extracts. Of course, I cannot carry that bulky document. If you look at page 2, paragraph 13, the minister tells us that as at the mid-year review, he has spent 4.7 billion on capacity charges. 4.7 billion. 6 months down the lane, he tells us that he has spent 12.5 billion, meaning that within that 6 months period, he spent about 7.2 or so billion. That must reflect in the budget. I've gone through the whole budget, not just the budget statement, but the parent budget itself, which is the bulky one with all the figures. There's nothing like that. But more intriguing, I serve on the finance committee with him. When the minister brought the issue of capacity charges, and I think it's important we settle this matter so that we know what actually constitutes capacity charges or what they call excess capacity, the actual amounts, then we know where we are going. We requested this from the minister himself, and Kojo would recall that we insisted that he should give us a breakdown, summary of energy sector payments against supplementary appropriation. That's when he came with a supplementary budget and asked that he wants to increase some taxes. These are the items. I have marked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of a total of 8. 5 of them has nothing to do with capacity charges. They have nothing to do with capacity. Yes, they are energy sector related payments, but they are not capacity charges. If the power plant delivers power and due to ECG's financial difficulty, they cannot pay, and the Ministry of Finance steps in to pay, that is not capacity charge. If you pay, for instance, I normally don't like Litasco, 500 million. That is fuel. Fuel has nothing to do with capacity charge. Fuel is a pass-through, which means that the plant is running. If the plant is sitting idle, and you are paying for an idle plant, you won't be paying 500 million for fuel. So I think that these issues are very, very serious. Then the economy proper. As it stands, I was looking at some of the figures. And in the 2021, I'm even more worried. First of all, we are projecting that we're going to get a revenue of about 20 billion extra. That is a big one. I've looked at all the revenue targets in the past 4 years. We've missed them. How to get an additional revenue of 20 billion is a Herculean one. Okay. Not the loans. These are direct revenues. Then if you take our tax revenue, it's about 55 billion. This year, interest payment and amortization, that is debt servicing alone, is 55 billion. So when we take our taxes, everything goes to service debt.
Okay, so I'll return to you, and that subject I mentioned to Dr. Theo Champong. You have already indicated that Agyapa is dead on arrival. We will ask you to justify why it should be dead on arrival. That if you look at Agyapa in detail, without, you know, the politics around it, is it not possible to have something that all the parties will agree is in the interest of Ghana? But before I move to Kojo, let me welcome Professor Bokping, who just joined us. Thank you so much for making the time to join us. I will get to you shortly. There is Nanaya who has a question. He says, the growth rate that Jinapo is talking about, he should remember that Mohammed's 7.9% was dependent on about 90% import. The so-called manufacturers were importing the finished goods, stick and repackaged here. That is not manufacturing. Akufo-Addo brought the 1D, 1F. These interventions saw mostly constructions of factories from scratch. Many companies ceased importing finished goods, rather raw materials to feed these factories. So production curve will definitely show this kind of growth from the beginning. Again, how much debt did the NPP borrow to clean the mess in the financial sector alone? Almost 9 billion, if my memory serves me right, in terms of economic management. We all know that the NPP is better. So this is coming from Nanaya. All right, yeah.
From the IMF.
So let me start off with some of the comments that were made via Zoom earlier. The conversation about whether or not our State of the Nation addresses should now begin to move into outputs instead of inputs, and then on micro matters. I think that we can all agree that our democracy and our development is in stages. When you don't have a democracy, what you are fighting for is even a constitution. When you have it, you are now looking for constitutional compliance, that every president should deliver his Article 67 obligations. And then now when you get a bit of that, you can now go into some of these fine details of can we now move it. So I think we are on a path. Nothing amiss there. Also, you look at today's SDGs as have been put out, and they are beginning to fine-tune some of the targets that all countries must have. Ghana is one of the very first countries to start budgeting with the SDG framework, which means budgeting with outcomes in mind. But you also have to bring it into our political economy and ask yourself, what does it mean when you tell the people that we have halved poverty? What are the people measuring? If people are measuring electricity extension and coverage to various towns and villages, if you say that you have used some of these, may I say, output matrices, does it necessarily resonate with the people? And in the State of the Nation address, you are communicating to the people. You are telling them also things that matter to their own benchmarks. So straddling between the two, we can gradually walk that path there. JJ talks about their extension of electricity by about 20%. What he doesn't mention is the funding mechanisms that President Kufuor had put in place to ensure that rural electrification could take place. He doesn't mention that one. And then, for example, you can ask whether or not we inherited a funding mechanism. Yes. But in any case, Samson, in economics, we have opportunity cost. Whatever you invest your money in, something has got to give. So remember, we inherited an economy that had its foundation heavily shaken. And you recall at that time we had a huge debate, a long debate about where our deficit was, about 11% of GDP at the time, where our nominal debt stock was, about 122. Our colleagues keep saying it was 120, not 122. Remember, they had moved us from about 9 billion to about 122. I'll get into the debt numbers later. Now, in that circumstance, you will spend the limited resources you have on some other items. If you take, and let me go to a few matters that he was speaking about, growth. So again, if you go to table 1 in the highlights of the budget, real sector growth performance, take from 2014 coming down to 2019. Take agriculture, for example, 2014, 0.9%. 2015, 2.3%. 2016, 2.9%. 2017, 6.1%, while planting for food and jobs. You are putting your money in an alternate area. Obviously, you will not be able to move electricity from 82 to 100 if you are spending that money on agriculture, which is ensuring that people out there across the country are having an opportunity to improve their output in terms of agriculture. 4.8 the following year, 4.6 the following year. And if you look at the quarter 1 to quarter 3, 2020, despite COVID, is 4.5, way better than what we had inherited. So governments make choices on where to put their money. And if in the end the government decides to put the money, let's say, in agriculture, and now says that haven't done that in this second term, I am going to focus on electricity extension, I think you can trust that it is reprioritizing and will move its monies there. So you cannot say that if it was an average 0.9% per year, it means it is impossible for the government to ramp it up from 85 to 100. Now take industry. I know he did the disaggregation, but look at the data from 2014, 1.1% growth, 2014, 1.1% in 2015, 4.3 in 2016, 15.7 in 2017, mostly because the lights were back on and industries could operate.
No.
2018, 10%, 2019, 6.4%. And then you will notice that when we went into COVID and now industries were having to close down, work shifts occurring, negative 3.1. So we can go through all the data. The story doesn't change that Ghana's economy has actually seen a ramp up in the last 3 years. If you take the question of NAPCO specifically, I think right from the beginning it was explained that...
And may I start on this point, that the reference to traffic, I think you may have been talking about, yes, not NAPCO, because I've gone to the NAPCO platform, and I remember the very start I engaged the CEO here, and it wasn't what you're talking about. They have Educate Ghana module, they have Enterprise Ghana module, Digitize Ghana module, Feed Ghana module, Heal Ghana module, Civil Ghana module, and Revenue Ghana module. They don't have a traffic module.
In fact, I just sent a message.
You accept a correction, or you're saying you deal with it?
No, I'll deal with this issue of NAPCO when I get...
No, what I mean is that you had mentioned that there's a traffic
if you
module.
Put somebody in charge of traffic management,
and they don't have for
and
traffic.
I'm saying when I get the opportunity, I'll give you. I've read the models. I would concede on that and give you those models that I think that even when they exit,
thank you. It's good and honorable to hear you say that.
So JJ makes a concession on that, because
model.
I just sent a message earlier when he mentioned it to Dr. Anyas, and he says not even one on traffic. Feed Ghana, Heal Ghana, Revenue.
That's okay.
Ghana,
we've gone through that.
All of those ones. And the idea from the beginning, as was explained, was that we were going to get these persons on a medium-term path where they get training, where they get some money. And there's a clear exit plan where some of them are going to get regular jobs in the areas they associate. And already some of them are being recruited into those job areas. Then there were those who, by virtue of the skill set they have acquired, can be contracted after the NAPCO period to provide those services in a private sector capacity to some of those agencies. So when the government says that it is envisaging the exit modules to start, I don't think it's fair to categorize it and scare people as a layoff, as my brother sought to do earlier. Now, let me deal with the issue of debt. And you notice that JJ speaks about nominals. He says, Akufo-Addo has added, 13 billion. Did you say 13 billion, JJ?
Thank you, I said that between President Kufuor, John Mahama, and Mills, we borrowed $4 billion from the Eurobond. President Akufo-Addo, in 4 years, is doing $13 billion. I have not dealt with nominal debt figures. I'll go to the percentages
but
and
those,
the relatives.
But those 13 billions, I mean, you agree, they are nominals. But they are not the aggregate nominals he's talking about.
In dollars.
But I'm saying they are nominals. Those are numbers. Yes, so they are nominals. I'm saying that the debt conversation is bigger than the nominals because borrowing has uses. Borrowing does not necessarily mean that the debt stock simpliciter is increasing by virtue of that. If you are swapping debts, it does not necessarily mean that by virtue of borrowing 13 billion, you have necessarily added that specific 13 billion to the debt stock, if it was for the purpose of debt swapping. Now,
so immediately that came up, naturally what I had to think about was, have you factored in how much was spent for the financial sector?
Apart from that, how much of our debt we have even paid?
You see, as you borrow, you pay some of the debt.
Absolutely.
And then you use some for capital expenditure. I'll come and deal with the issue of capital expenditure, recurrent expenditure, and the percentage of your debt as in relation to GDP.
When you just drop the numbers, 13 billion, though you haven't said it, you are signaling to somebody that perhaps that 13 billion is an additional debt. And I'm just saying that debt has usages. And therefore, we need to disaggregate and go into the details. Now, let me give you a quotation from the budget as was read by the Honorable Seche Mensah Bonsu, who did a great job yesterday, by the way. It says, Mr. Speaker, the total public debt has increased from 122 billion, which was 56.9% of the rebased GDP. And I use the word rebased. I'll come back to it. To 291.6 billion, 76% of the current GDP. at the end of December 2020, actually. Included in the debt stock and the debt to GDP ratio at the end of 2020 are the following non-recurrent burdens that we had to deal with as a matter of urgency. The fiscal impact of COVID-19, that's about 19.7 billion cedis. The cost of the financial sector cleanup, about 21 billion cedis. Cost of excess capacity charges paid to IPPs, about 12 billion cedis. And that's where JJ says he even has issues with some of those that have been classified under that. But that's a total of about 50 billion, if my math is right, out of this 296 that we are talking about. He goes on to say, Mr. Speaker, the following information is useful. And that's why I say the nominals are not helpful. Between 2004 and 2008, Ghana's debt stock, because in the end, what you want to find out is what is the addition to the debt stock? After you do the debt swapping and whatever you claim the utilization is for, what is the additional addition, or what is the addition to the debt stock? Between 2004 and 2008, Ghana's debt stock increased by 30%. This is President Kufuor's second term. Between 2008 and 2012, the debt stock increased by 269%. This is the late former President Mills's first term, 269%. Between 2012 and 2016, the increase in the debt stock was 243%. President Mahama's tenure. Between 2016 and 2020, Akufo-Addo's first term, the increase in Ghana's debt stock is 137%, and this includes banking sector, COVID, and energy-related matters. So when it comes to debt management and the question of who has increased our debt stock in a disproportionate manner, we can have that debate, but we are not even grounding that as our main argument. Because you see, like the president says in the State of the Nation address, the outcome of the 2020 election is a message to us that this debate on who has contributed more to our debt stock, even though we can have it, is exactly not what the people of Ghana are looking for. They are looking for a conversation of what is our fiscal position now and what is the plan to get us out of it. And I think that focusing on those, you will get clarity in where the government intends to spend money to ensure that, one, the current fiscal slippages that we have are corrected. Two, the investments that need to be made in the real sector, agriculture, industry, services, and their construction, etc., so that people's businesses can move. Growth will rebound. People can get jobs and incomes. It can happen. And then at the same time, the COVID challenges that we have, we can fund dealing with it. Those are the conversations that the people of Ghana desire to hear. Now, let me quickly speak about Agyapa, because I think you've introduced it.
We will bring Agyapa in.
Very well.
We'll bring Agyapa in to finish the discussion on the State of the Nation, then move on to the budget proper.
Very well.
So if I may bring in Professor Bokwin here. Professor Bokwin, thank you once again for joining us. Now, the issue that your colleague Theo Champon raises about, yes, these are the inputs, but can we talk about the outcomes or the results that they bring? Can we measure things in that direction? I suppose that must be a most important way to look at the issues. Not so. The president speaks about Agenda 111, which will see the construction of 100-bed district hospitals in 101 districts with no hospitals and 7 regional hospitals for the new regions. It's good to know in the end that we have built these, but to what use and the outcomes they deliver to our health as citizens. That must be the most important way to measure these things. Is that not so?
Yeah, thank you very much, Samson, and good morning to honorables and then our cherished viewers. Thank you for this opportunity. I think it's a way to go now, and I agree 100% with you that we need to change the narrative, because where the focus is would also influence policymakers to look in that direction and begin to align the system to generate the data that would enable us to track our progress along those lines that reflect more human development issues. So I think, and I also agree with the MP that yes, it's a progress. So at some point we focus on constitution, democracy, and equality and all of that. But I think the time has come. If you look at the way both parties we have had to debate statistics, which necessarily may not put food on the table, which necessarily is not helping in limiting the poverty of opportunities available to Ghanaians. And we have spent quite a lot of our time since 1992 to talk about GDP, GDP that we cannot celebrate, GDP that did not come along with job creation, GDP that we don't see on our table, given the low local content of our economy. So it's important that we begin to introduce aggressively that dimension where it also shapes the data we collect, and it also shapes the narrative, and it begins to also shape how political parties fashion their manifestos, which will ultimately pass through the budgets, because the manifesto in itself may not translate to useful outcome. It has to go through the budget. So I think that is the way to go. And even we are a bit behind, because if you look at the development literature today, people have moved beyond GDP. Other countries are talking about gross happiness index. Others are talking about social progression index, human development index, and all of that. So you have to look at the others are measuring the strength or the health of their economic recovery on the number of jobs that are being created on monthly basis, on quarterly basis. So that is the way to go now, because ultimately GDP necessarily doesn't mean that all is well with Ghanaians. No, you're also looking at the redistributive effect of that. So if you look at the last 3 decades, even with the progress that we are talking about, it's coming along with huge inequalities. Okay, and COVID has made it worse. And then when we get to the budget proper, we'll look at whether the interventions really help to bridge that gap. So going forward, and I think I will plead with two main political parties that yes, perhaps enough of these statistics now. Can we lift the veil and begin to look at the people? Because at the center of economic progress, at the center of economic policy, has to do with people. It has to do with people. If it's not about people, let's not talk about it. Okay, let's not talk about it.
But where do you start? Where do you start, and how do you show what you are doing, but the statistics?
We have started from somewhere. And I do recognize that we have devoted enough of our time to talking about these things over a certain period. Let's begin to shift the conversation gradually. That is how societies make progress. Okay, so we can say that we've been scoring 50 and we consider that an A. Can we shift that threshold a bit and stretch ourselves a bit, given our potential? Okay, and we begin to rope in quite a lot of people. So between the two main political parties since 1992, they've all contributed their share towards our progress. We recognize that. And we are talking about debt numbers. If you look at the NDC, yes, they accumulated debt, but they can also explain. You know why? Because during Mohammed's time, there were crises. There were crises that also influenced the debt accumulation. And thankfully today, we are also talking about COVID that is also influencing the debt accumulation. So both parties, there isn't anything particularly unique about how we are managing our crisis, because we load it on the debt stock. And that is why now we have to decelerate in one way or the other. So we have to find a common ground as a country, because you see, we saw this coming. So why am I saying we saw this coming? You see, when your fiscal deficit is rising, because there's an intricate link between your fiscal deficit and debt sustainability. Okay, so your debt levels are rising up, because at some point in time, you certainly have to take a decision to decelerate. And that is where we are now, with the levies and the introduction of taxes that we are doing now, almost at a contradictory path with our position from, let's say, 2017 and all of that. But this is where I can understand the situation, because it is impossible to continue on this path. It's impossible. So at some point in time, we have to take that hard decision. Okay, and when we say that, okay, we support this move, it's not like it's the best option. Yeah, but it's like there isn't any logical alternative now.
So when the president is giving us a state of the nation, what's the suggestion? He shouldn't give us the figures, he shouldn't give us the statistics, but tell us the outcomes, or he should do all. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, well, yes. So we should begin to introduce the outcome variables in incremental measure going forward.
Especially for a government that had a ministry dedicated to monitoring and evaluation, correct?
Yes, we have to. Even if they didn't have that, I think the time has come where we begin to open up the conversation, okay, and beyond that, and we not only in terms of government, but we begin to also stray into the domain of Bank of Ghana to begin to also get other data, okay, and come out with other outcomes from their level that put people at the center of it. At the national level, when we are talking about progress today, we are talking about the 5 P's of prosperity, of people, planet, peace, and partnership. And we must look at how all these things help to sustain our environment, our planet Earth. Peace, prosperity, the people is very, very important. So we are not saying that we have not done well. We are saying that we have made some progress, but can we begin to expand the scope of the conversation and begin to look at it more in terms of people-centered approach to our policy prescriptions, where that becomes a more better proxy for development than the usual GDP? Because look, you know something, our economy, you can summarize it in this way: given the huge foreign dominance, we pound enough fufu for others to go and eat. So if you look at how much we're able to retain here, if you look at the return on labor relative to return on capital employed, which comes from outside, and you see that gap, you see that we are only working hard and the money just exits the country. The redistributive effect of the progress we are talking about here is very, very weak. And we have to be concerned. And I know that we are capable of doing that. We have that potential to do that. And when we begin to accept that conversation, like Theo said, what it will mean is that we have to now realign the system to generate that data that will help us to monitor our progress consistently along those lines.
All right. Okay, so let me begin with Theo now. I think I can start with you and Theo on what you think about the president's, prompting that Agyapa is back. I've heard civil society organizations who, came together against it, suggest that the president seemed to think that when people voted for him, they meant that they had endorsed it. And he also seems to think that once you are voted for, that's the end of it. The people don't participate in the governance process anymore. You have to do everything by yourself and not listen to anybody. Theo, what do you say? Do you think the president is not listening by this showing?
So I think the outcome of the election from last year actually is a function of two things. One of which, or an important consideration, was the fact that people were not generally, or let me say some people, not everyone, were not generally happy with the issue or the fight of corruption. And if you recall, one of the big issues that was symptomatic of that was this whole Agyapa issue and Martin Amidu having to resign as a result of that. And that reflected in the vote. So yes, the government has a mandate to carry on its second-term development agenda. But also I think part of the mandate was that we want deals such as Agyapa to be reconsidered and to be reevaluated, not necessarily in terms of what was being proposed. So on that basis, I struggled to see how the revised form of Agyapa, and I concede that I don't have all the details yet, probably not others, but it'll be interesting to see what is different in Agyapa now, right, in its revised form versus what was presented to Parliament in August of 2020. And then the question is, with the current parliamentary architecture that we do have, is it something that would actually pass in the House? I'm not sure that would be the case, because a lot of work would have to be done by the government, a lot of back channel arrangement, and a lot of consultations would also have to be done. So Agyapa 1.0 had issues where civil society, other respected academics all raised very serious substantive issues around, for example, the valuation, around, for example, potential disclosure of beneficial owners in the shell entities that will run the firm in the city of London. There were issues raised around whether or not it actually makes sense to put or mortgage the royalty arrangement for a 15-year period, and why not just forward sell that for, say, 4 or 5 years and get the receipt upfront, but you don't lock in another future government, right, into using those minerals royalties to support their development agenda. All these issues are still there. I don't think that they have necessarily been addressed. So I think what for me is really key is to see what new Agyapa deal would be proposed or presented to the House. And then number two, is this going to be substantially different from what we had already, are used to from last year? If that is not the case, and with the split or hung parliament that we do have, I just struggle to see how that will pass in the House.
So you are open to having a second look, review?
Oh, yes. I mean, we all want to see what is new. Let me speak for myself.
Exactly.
I want to see what is new. I want to see how the issues that were raised, right, with the first deal have been addressed. I want to see how this ends up actually creating value for the people of Ghana that we actually cannot get immediately. I mean, because you're looking at what, between 500 million and 1 billion raising upfront. That's money that we can actually raise in Ghana domestically. And all these things need to be fully considered. So I think we just need to see what is really new on Agyapa before we can actually make any useful inferences.
Right. So, Professor Bokping, I'll hear from John Jinapo and Kojo and have you speak last to tell us whether or not it is worth having a second look at it. Yes.
I think if you let me handle Agyapa, a lot of the conversation around it will be easily solved, even for JJ and Professor Bokping who want to speak about.
Why not?
Yeah.
Why not? Let's start with you.
Because I notice a classic case once again of a different narrative spun out of what the president said. I want to quote the president's words and go back to what happened before this.
Okay.
Because you know that today, the narrative that has been spun out there is that Agyapa is back, or that the president has said in Parliament that he intends to go ahead with Agyapa, and that therefore he's probably not listening to the criticisms that were raised. He has never said that. In fact, and this is an aside, last week at our press briefing, I was categorical in saying that there are no sanctions as at now for persons who haven't taken COVID or who refuse the COVID vaccines. The story was spun out of it that government intends to sanction people who are not taking the COVID vaccine. And then you have a whole conversation going on built on a wrong narrative. Let me quote the president's words. The president says, Mr. Speaker, let me at this point assure the House. And I'll come back to why he used the word assure, because I was in the speech drafting session and the debate we had about it. Let me at this point assure the House that in the course of this session of Parliament, government will come back to engage the House on the steps it intends to take on the future of the Agyapa transaction. He hasn't said Agyapa is back. He hasn't said that he even intends to go ahead with it. The president, when the special prosecutor issued his document, caused the statement to be issued. And in that statement, the president's director of communications was quite clear that he needs the Attorney General and the Finance Ministry to review all the processes and the details of that transaction and possibly go back to Parliament for Parliament to have a second look at it. The president, in speaking to Parliament...
Go back to Parliament and not possibly. I think...
Go back to Parliament for what?
Take it back to Parliament. Yeah.
For what? Because there are a number of options. You can go to Parliament and say that you want a rescission of the initial approval that was given because you don't even intend to go ahead with it. You can go to Parliament and go with a new transaction. That, okay, this is the new transaction responding to the set of issues that was raised. The president, after that, now at the State of the Nation's address, opts not to be silent on Agyapa. In fact, he considered it during the conversations. He was quite clear that he needs to be open and frank with Parliament that having announced publicly that I will have this thing come back to you, I assure you that it will come back to you. If there was something untoward in it, something that was wrong, something that we all missed, you have an opportunity to deal with it one more time. So I think it is important from the beginning to set the narrative right. The president has not said Agyapa is back. He hasn't said I'm going ahead with Agyapa. No, I'm telling you. I'm telling you. What he has said, but of course, what he has said is that in consonance with the earlier statement that was issued, he's going to have it brought back to Parliament. You know that the Attorney General's Department, the new Attorney General, is working on it. The new Attorney General has had an opportunity to do a review of, for example, what the Special Prosecutor wrote about it, and then the substantive work, and is in the process of formally communicating the legal advice on it, so that that process of going to Parliament can take place. So I don't think we should start off with this argument that Agyapa is back.
Yes,
that it suggests that the president did not.
We clearly are on the trajectory that Agyapa will be back, unless Parliament decides otherwise and it overrides government's objective.
But do we know what the president is bringing to Parliament?
He's bringing back Agyapa in whatever form, we do not know.
He is coming to Parliament on the future of the Agyapa transaction, which includes the possibility that he will not go ahead with it. That's the point I'm making.
Okay.
That is the point I'm making. And I'm saying that starting off on a certain premise, that it is a fait accompli, and that Agyapa in its old form, Agyapa as we understood it, is back in Parliament, is not a fair way to start the conversation. Now, just quickly, because of this would...
So you are suggesting that eventually the cabinet will bring Agyapa to Parliament and expect that the majority that you belong to will say, we don't want it.
No, I'm suggesting, first of all, cabinet is yet to be seized with the opinion of the Attorney General, having reviewed it. The president has already made a commitment that, I mean, this was not a transaction that the executive sat in the chambers of the Jubilee House and prepared without recourse to anybody. Let me give you a bit of history. The concept of monetizing our mineral royalties is not a new concept. I hear the economists talk about forward selling, etc. As far back as between 2009 and 2012, even the Mills administration took a decision that it is important to monetize our mineral royalties, not necessarily forward selling, and started a transaction to that effect. Professor Mills passed on, they did not complete that transaction. President Akufo-Addo's tenure decided not to do it administratively by the executive. First, to come to Parliament and engage Parliament in a conversation on how we should monetize our mineral royalties with a whole law. And Parliament passed that law. That law, the Mineral Incomes Investment Fund Act, spelled out the structure of how you should monetize your mineral resources or mineral royalties. And it included the option to have an offshore special purpose vehicle in a tax haven. They are all in the law. Now, it was in putting together the specific transaction that we met opposition. And the president said, halt it, don't go ahead with it. The special prosecutor said, I want to do a corruption risk assessment on it. He said, go ahead and do it. It was done. The president said, well, I have heard his comments. I'm referring it for review, and I will come back to Parliament on it. So the shell, the structure, is one that is an act of Parliament that exists today. If the president says, I want this specific transaction reviewed, and then we'll come back to Parliament, all I'm saying is that, first of all, let's not run off on the supposition that it is coming back. Now, assuming that the Attorney General completes his work, comes to Cabinet and says, let's not go ahead with this transaction. The President will come back to Parliament and say, the future of the Agyapa transaction is that it is not going ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. But once the President has hinted that it is coming back, we must take his word that it will come back to Parliament. It will come back to Parliament.
Okay. That's the point.
Okay.
Now, I pleaded with you that I needed 30 seconds just to deal with this issue of NABCO quickly. I've checked the website, I've checked the figures. I hold a view that it's something all of us must be interested in. So if you have about 90-something thousand people in the various models and you are exiting them this year, it means that it could have serious implications. And it's something, especially when you are reducing their budget. Even in 4 years, they've not gotten jobs. I don't think that just exiting 96,000 of them might land them jobs. I'm raising it because I think that it has serious implications, and all of us.
I think it's a fair point. But to say they are being laid off is what I disagree with.
Okay.
They are being exited.
All right.
Some are being recruited.
Semantics.
Some are being recruited.
All right.
No, let me deal with this.
All right.
So
the President said, I'm giving the assurance in the course of this session of Parliament. This session. Does this session mean the entire...
No, that's a
4 years.
Yeah, that's a session. Our session is 4 years.
No.
Government.
The session is 1 year.
Session.
Sorry.
The session. Right. So that is to the end of this year.
Okay. So
the first session.
Yes. So government will come back.
Yes.
To engage the House on the steps it intends to take. It's not coming for advice. It's going to engage you on the steps it intends to take on the future of the Agyapa transaction. You say it's dead on arrival. What's your basis? Are you not willing to listen to anything else? What was your point at the start? As we are told, the Attorney General, it's that important that this early, the Attorney General is seized with it and working on it. So why are you, before you even saw it, kicking against it?
No, the first issue has to do with that company itself and its incorporation. Once you come with that structure, it's dead on arrival.
Yeah.
So if they do not come with that structure,
then we are not talking
we have
of
Agyapa.
We are not talking of Agyapa then. We are talking of something different. But Agyapa and its incorporation, we have serious issues with that. And we're saying that if you bring that Agyapa, consider it dead on arrival. Because the first issue is the way it's been incorporated. We have serious issue with its incorporation, and we think that it should be thrown off. And don't forget, in Parliament, we maintained our position and walked out. Because we didn't want to be part of that structure. We have no problem if there's an attempt to look at our mineral royalties and see how we can maximize that. But not in this Agyapa structure. As for this structure, it should be considered dead on arrival in Parliament as far as the minority is concerned. Doc and Go have raised serious issues about valuation, which we can engage. Issues about the listing, where the minister says that if they list in a tax haven, they won't pay some taxes. We hold the view that you should rather consider listing in Ghana first, because that will send a positive signal.
But it's a simultaneous listing, just by the way.
I'm saying that
Stock Exchange, and then
the
minister's
rationale for establishing in a tax haven had to do with the issue of taxation. And I'm saying that it doesn't sit well with me as a legislator. I think that you should rather consider Ghana and all those other issues. And this issue of is 100% government, is 100%. Yes, when you are forming a company as Samsung, you form it as 100% Samsung. But you intend going to sell the shares through an IPO. So this issue of, it's 100% government is neither here nor there. The ultimate aim is to go to the stock exchange and list. And by so doing, you are divulging some of the shares. So that is clear.
There's this aspect of this dead on arrival that I've heard from you, I've heard from Kesela Tofossing, and I need to understand. You are the minority. Even though an interesting minority, people had hopes that you would be able to use your numbers to do something. You have failed them. Totally failed them. So when you say dead on arrival, what do you mean? Because they have the majority.
Yeah, people had hopes.
Even if it takes one, they still can make it.
People had hopes that we use our numbers to elect a speaker.
So you cannot be saying it is dead on arrival.
We are speaking for ourselves. And we said as far as the minority is concerned,
The old Agyapa structure, if it's brought back, is dead on
the Agyapa itself, we said that we have an issue with that Agyapa and its incorporation.
Well.
And once the fundamental issue has a problem, any other thing you put on it is dead on arrival.
But JJ, you do understand, and I'm sorry to interrupt. You know I've not been doing this. You do understand that what the president said was not that he was bringing back Agyapa as it is for Parliament to re-bless. As I've explained this morning, that's not what he said. Number two, the second thing about why, and I'll be very quick, why we've been insisting that it's 100% GOG owned is that in the beginning, Samson, if you recall, the concept of beneficial owners were thrown out there, that there are some beneficial owners. Who are the beneficial owners behind? And that is why we have been explaining that there's no beneficial owner.
No, it's a legitimate point. I get your drift.
I just want to explain that.
The issue of the beneficial owner is that if you undervalue Agyapa, instead of a 3.7 billion, you undervalue it at 1 billion, go through an IPO, and some people form shell companies and other companies to buy into it. Then the actual value comes up. When you are trading on the secondary market, they will cream off the difference.
And it was explained
so
that
the issue of beneficial
and the IPO
is critical.
Were different.
Now, do you get my point?
I do.
That you can't undervalue a company.
I get that argument.
Go and list it on the stock exchange. Get your people to participate, benefit from it, and cream up the difference. It then means that there's somebody behind or beneath, and we need to unveil that curtain. So when we say beneficial owners, that is critical because you won't own the company 100%. And to the extent that you wouldn't own it 100%, and somebody will own some of the shares, they will be benefiting. And we want to probe into that.
Yes, but JJ, if you wanted to make a point, I'm sorry to do this, but if you wanted to make a point that there should be full disclosure on all potential participators, the concept was not that of beneficial owners. Secondly, the IPO strike price is, and that's why they kept making the point that the pricing hasn't taken place. The IPO strike price was what was going to do the full costing of the value of what we have there. This initial figure that was put there is at the point of registering the vehicle.
Why?
So there was room to do all of that.
Okay.
But being that as a president, we'll have an opportunity to look at it.
I think something is nailed the issue clearly, that the president's intent coming back.
Yes.
In whatever form, in whatever shape, we do not know. We have serious issues. We've raised legitimate issues. And he says that, why didn't you raise this at committee? And that is important for me, Samson. Why raise such a huge deal within 24 hours?
Okay, thank you.
Why?
Okay, thank you.
What is so urgent about it that you couldn't allow us to interrogate the issue?
That was enough room.
So
24 hours.
That was enough room.
See where we are.
We want to close.
See where we are.
We want to conclude this session and come on the budget.
Yes.
So let's have Dr. Prosper-Bokwing tell us, where do you stand? Do you think, are you open to listening a second time on Agyapa? Is there any specific aspect you would wish is reviewed? And then when you are done, since we have also been joined by Dr. Priscilla Chumesiba for Senior Lecturer, Department of Economics, University of Ghana, we will hear from her briefly, and then we take our break and return to focus on the budgets.
All right, thank you very much, Samson. I think I am open to Agyapa coming back, and I would urge that we give government the benefit of the doubt to see the revisions that have been made. But I would suggest that given, not only from the minority, given the position of civil society, academics, and others, government would take another look, critical look, in whatever form that they intend to present it to Parliament, and incorporate that. And if possible, because you see, for branding purposes, the name Agyapa immediately resurrects so many things now, given what has happened. So I would suggest that government should take another look at the branding also, and then the content, but situating the discussion within the broader context of revenue monetization, commoditization, and all of that, I think it's not new. In fact, we've done that with cocoa, we've done that with so many other commodities and natural resources. So there's a context to that. In fact, in 2017, 2018, the IMF had a reason to say that government's excessive revenue monetization needs to be looked at again. I mean, that drive is there, and it's largely because our revenue envelope remains dwarfed. So we are looking at the best way, the optimal way to maximize the alternative uses of that. So within that context, Samson, I would say that I'm open. And the reason I'm saying I'm open is that so much has been said about this Agyapa and all of that. Perhaps we would then have the opportunity, given the shape of Parliament now, to look at this critically. And at the end, they see how Ghana wins out of this. To that extent, I would say that I am open.
All right.
But yes. I can also sympathize with the NDC and their position, also given the brand, the name, and what has come to be known of it and all of that. So I think that part of the revisions that government would have to do or make should take some of these serious concerns into consideration, because we have a very interesting minority in Parliament now. And therefore, whatever that goes to Parliament must, even before it gets there, recognize these dynamics, and not only the NDC in Parliament, but civil society, and then other stakeholders, academics, and all of that.
Right.
So to that extent, let's have an open debate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now, Doc, what do you also say? Does it sound to you as if government is posturing as though without this, it does not have a basket to take care of the economy?
Thank you very much, and good morning to your panelists, and a very good morning to your cherished listeners and viewers. Thank you very much once again. I'll say that for the Agyapa deal, to be honest with you, I have not really looked into the issues, but to a large extent, a lot of people, stakeholders, civil society, the opposition, well-meaning Ghanaians have expressed concerns about the issues. So I believe that government needs to take a step back, address all the issues before it sends us back to Parliament. Because indeed, in all this, the President's position has been, yes, let's build consensus. We don't have a great majority in Parliament, so there is the need to reach out to the other side of the House. But so in doing some of these things, it doesn't send a good signal. It's as if, yes, you can do all the talk, I'll have my way regardless because I am in government. And that does not augur well for a nation that is seeking to build consensus and deliver development going forward. On the other issue of trying to bounce our hopes on delivering on most of the, initiatives that have been outlined, depending on whether or not Agyapa comes on. It's also a cause to worry. And over time, we know that most resource-rich nations are not necessarily nations that have developed or nations that have been able to lift their people out of poverty to deliver development to them. Why is that? Because most of the times we believe that we have enough resources. So you see a lot of mismanagement, corruption here and there, and we do not work hard at developing the key sectors of the economy out of minerals. And that is a challenge. If you remember, in 2008, thereabout, when we discovered oil in commercial quantities, we thought that by now our economy would have significantly developed based on all of a sudden the huge windfall gain we made from petroleum resources. But indeed, we are back here still discussing. So I think that as a nation, we need to critically look at, yes, resources are good. And whilst we are exploiting those resources, we also need to keep our eyes on what we leave for the next generation. It's also very important. But we need to think out of the box. And sometimes look at other avenues of trying to move the economy forward rather than on minerals. And indeed, we know a very popular Dutch disease concept where when you all of a sudden discover minerals, you see that you lose focus on all the other sectors. And all of a sudden, you find that your concentration is on the minerals that you've discovered. Indeed, when you look at the data for Ghana, it tells that around the time 2009, 10, 11, the non-oil sector was not doing well because all the concentration was on oil. And these sectors are not labor-intensive sectors which would deliver decent jobs to the masses or the young people who need jobs. So these are issues that we need to look at going forward.
All right, so we will take a break, and when we return, we will commence the budget discussion with Dr. Priscilla Chumesi Bafo. So, gentlemen and lady, I will need you, because we shall have very limited time, to focus on specific aspects and to deliver in very crisp manner, so that time doesn't run out on you when you are making your delivery. We have heard other areas being highlighted, including the taxes that are coming in. Kojo would also like us to, well, the government would like us to pay attention to some of the freebies, if you like, that is in there. But like they always say, the only free cheese is in the mousetrap. We will be right back to look at the budget. And this show is brought to you by Bank of Africa, strong as a group, close as a partner. MTN, everywhere you go. Ashesi University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Duraplast, where Duraplast goes, water flows. Having mosquito spray and coil, pleasant on humans, tough nightmare on insects. And Napa Foods, it is tasty. DBS Industries, if you're talking roofing, that's where to go. Robert & Sons Limited Optical Services, your comprehensive eye care services provider. We'll be right back. This is NewsFile.